the code. Stepping clean. Leave louder. No ring, no rules. We make our own way. No ring, no rules. Legend starts today. No ring, no rules. Watch us take the crown. No ring, no rules. We don't back down. Lights off, name on, pressure in the room. Cold eyes, sharp grin, big talk, sealed doom. We came built for it, heavy in the chest. Every line hits hard, every move say less. Hear that hush now, that's the room goes still. One breath, one spark, then we break the seal. No ring, no rules. We make our own way. Legend starts today. No ring, no rules. Watch us take the crown. No ring, no rules. We don't back down. No script, only nerve and skill. No leash, no chain, only what is real. From the first word out to the final roar. If you want the war, we give you more. No ring, no rules. We make our own way. No ring, no rules. Legend starts today. No ring, no rules. Watch us take the crown. No ring, no rules. We don't back down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this is right here is one of the most influential talk shows we're going to have on No Rings, No Rules. Episode 9, WCW versus ECW, 2 legacies, 1 revolution, the history. Before I get myself carried away here, I want to give the introduction as well as the introduction to these two men that's going to help me during this WCW ECW talk show. First, we're going to bring in the one and only Iceman 3000. And another guest we got on here for this podcast is none other than ONW owner Devin Broski, the Alpha, here for this legendary talk show and No Ring, No Rules podcast. And this is going to be some things that you just need to watch. Get your popcorn, get your chips, take notes and study on it because this is going to be a good one. Now, getting to the introduction. Before I get ready to read this introduction, Iceman Broski, if you want introduction of yourselves, when y'all have the floor to do so.
I'll let Devin go first.
Thank you very much, Iceman. I am the ONW owner and the rising star of VWA. I've been in the business since 2019, and we've been growing and growing for quite some time. And I'm just honored and grateful for being on this coming talk show of No Ring, No Rules. Thank you, Mr. Mondo, for allowing me to be a part of something great. Iceman, you're up.
All right, and I'm Iceman 3000, owner of APW Alligator Pro Wrestling. And it's an honor to be on here today to talk about the history of ECW and WCW.
Now we get into the major introduction here, since both manas gave proper introductions, and much love and respect to both. As we get ready to give this introduction, welcome to another explosive edition of No Rings, No Rules podcast. Tonight, we're taking a trip back to one of the most important periods in professional wrestling history. Before Monday Night Wars became a battle between two major companies, there was a revolution happening from two different places. What places? World Championship Wrestling, WCW. And one of my favorites, Extreme Championship Wrestling, ECW. Buckle up, because we are going to have an episode that you definitely want to enjoy here for this episode on episode 9. One of the massive arenas, television dinners, legendary championships, and some of the biggest names in wrestling. The other is built on reputation, on innovation, hardcore wrestling, passionate fans, and giving opportunities to wrestlers who weren't always getting their chance elsewhere. Tonight, we're talking about the eras, champions, matches, rivalries, superstars, mid-carders, underrated performers, and moments that made history. This isn't just a history lesson. This is celebrating two wrestling revolutions. Welcome to No Ring, No Rules, episode 9, ladies and gentlemen. And without further ado, we're going to do the first segment here. I hope you guys brought your popcorn ready, because I want to talk about this, as well as Iceman. I know he's excited.
Oh, yeah.
Moment here. Before we get to that we're going to get into the very first segment. What's the segment? The WCW errors. What's the WCW errors, CJ? What's the WCW errors, Brosky or Iceman? Let's see if the fans here knows their history of the WCW errors from chronological order, from alphabetical order, that is.
Well, if I may start it off, I do remember about the whole order of the golden era.
There's 4 errors, actually 5 errors of WCW. The first one is the NWA WCW Foundation error. These had Jim Crockett Promotions. I don't know if you guys remember them, but it was back when wrestling was a huge hit. Jim Crockett Promotions, they was like really big back in the day. And, you know, guys, before we get into that, welcome DJ Chaotic to this segment. And before we get on to this segment, I don't want to jump ship here, because I feel like DJ needs to give his introduction. So, DJ, you got the floor to give your introduction as well.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am DJ Chaotic, host and founder of the Chaotic Syndicate Network, and YouTube channel links will be provided after the show is over.
Now, we asked DJ to get you back on topic here. The WCW errors. They got 5 of them.
Yep.
Okay, we're going to start with the first one. The NWA WCW Foundation error. This is back in Jim Crockett Promotions. This is where we saw Rock and Roll Express. This is where we saw the Gangsters. If you don't know who the Gangsters are, that would be New Jack.
Oh, yeah, I know who that is.
And I don't know who his tag team partner is, but I'm pretty sure DJ can hit on that topic. But DJ, if you want to hit up that topic, you can. for the
So
game.
the gangsters. That was Mustafa and New Jack.
There you go.
Mustafa was like the big heavy hitter to New Jack, and these same two people were the same guys that were bouncing between that and ECW.
Now we get in the NWA WCW era before we go to ECW. Since DJ gave,
I'm just putting that out there.
I know, but I'm just saying, getting back on what we need to get back on. You know, the NWA and the WCW Foundation era, you had guys like the Four Horsemen, Ric Flair, Sting, Dusty Rhodes, the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, one of my favorite greatest tag teams of all time. Much love and respect to them. And the rise of Southern style wrestling. Now, I know Broski, he was a part of that Southern style wrestling when, you know, he done it in Tennessee as well as me in Kentucky. Southern style wrestling is more of taking a hit. It's all about brutality. We Southern boys, we like to smack the crap out of each other. So back in the NWA and WCW Foundation era, this is how it was. They had heavy hitters. You know, Ric Flair was one of them. Sting, Dusty Rhodes. You know, out of those eras.
If I'm not mistaken, back around that time, wasn't Stunning Steve Austin a part of that WCW era?
Yes. Formerly known as Stone Cold Steve Austin, which in WCW he was known as Stunning Steve Austin, I think.
Yeah, because he was teamed up alongside Brian Pillman Jr.
Now we get on to the early WCW era. This had my favorite list here of WCW, and two of my favorites actually had a match in WCW that we will talk about later on in the segments. But in the WCW era, Ric Flair, Sting, Vader, Lex Luger, Ricky Steamboat, Dangerous Alliance, and a Clash of Champions. Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair was one of my favorites. One of my favorite matches of WCW. Why? You go back and look at one of their matches. Iceman can tell you, Broski can tell you, and also DJ here can tell you that if you go back and look at their matches, Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat had a knife edge chop contest. In other words, Ric Flair would chop the shit out of him, and here comes Ricky dragging Steamboat, turning Ric Flair around, chopping the shit out of him. It was more like a chop war. These two guys.
Yeah, it was definitely one of them heated rivalries that you just couldn't bear to keep it kept you on the edge of your seat.
I mean, here's the thing. Not only it kept you at the edge of your seat, but when you saw Ric Flair gave a chop, you know, you literally thought Ric Flair knocked the wind out of him, you know, and Ricky Steamboat, you know, he was in the same category as Ric Flair. He could throw his own chops.
And then on top of all that, if anybody ever noticed, and they had those close-ups of their chest, you could see the red from the slaps.
And if you get hit with enough of them, it will end up bruised over or welts.
Mm-hmm.
I know. I've experienced a total of 32 of them in one setting.
Trust me, I took a few during the one video. I think CJ saw it from the Blade himself and Ali.
Now we get into the, I don't know if you guys remember this, the Hulkamania New World Order era.
Oh, yeah. Started very faintly at Bash at the Beach.
This right here was my favorite WCW era. You know, no disrespect to Sting, Lex Luger, Ricky Steamboat, Ric Flair, but these guys was my favorite. Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, rest in peace to the two of the legends that I named here. Hulk Hogan, rest in peace to him. Also Scott Hall,
a.k.a. Razor Ramon.
In other words, he was always the one that literally had a toothpick, you know, talking at the same time and say, listen here, Chico, my very favorite WCW guy of all time. Then you
Say
have
hello to the bad guy.
definitely what DJ's saying. I loved how DJ put that in there. Definitely loved what DJ was saying. One of Razor Ramon's very famous quotes. Definitely that is a memorial tribute there to WCW. But also we take a look at X-Pac, known as SYXX. I don't know how to 6.
Yep.
6. And then you also had Eric Bischoff, which I love Eric Bischoff, but he was not really an NWO guy.
But me personally, it's when they added Scott Steiner to the mix that really set the tone for the NWO.
Pretty much, it came down to the formation of NWO, Monday Night Nitro, and the Monday Night Wars. That pretty much made that Hulkamania New World Order era what it is, what it was in WCW. Now, I don't know if, out of all these things I've just mentioned, out of all three of these eras, if Iceman and Broski wants to put their input, they got the mic to do so. Out of all these eras that I mentioned before, I go on to the late 90s WCW era.
Well, what I can remember is when the NWO tried to get Sting to join them, and he basically took the baseball bat and said, look, I'm not joining any of you. I'm on my own. I work alone.
I do remember that.
Yep.
Here's one thing that I think everybody probably remembers. And this is probably one of the most highlighted moments in WCW, when the LWO led by Eddie Guerrero went up against Hogan's NWO.
Oh.
Remember when they shot Rey Mysterio like a lawn dart onto the truck, to the production truck?
Oh, yeah, when Kevin Nash tossed Rey Mysterio around like a rag doll?
Mm-hmm. And then we can't forget this highlight right here. That came later, but I'll mention it later. Diamond Dallas Page was probably one of the most highlighted guys in WCW.
Well, that was the late 90s. We're trying to get on the...
But in that time frame, I think the best match that I liked in that run, if anybody remembers Sting versus Ric Flair Clash of Champions.
Oh, yeah. That's what started Sting's whole career.
Now, getting back on topic, the whole thing that I loved, I love Sting. I'm a huge Lex Luger guy, Ricky Steamboat, Ric Flair, definitely Dusty Rhodes and the World Warriors are those, eras. But if Broski and Iceman don't have anything to put out to these eras before we go into the late 90s.
The one thing that we cannot forget about that era was the late Arn Anderson. Yep. Arn Anderson did a highlight run in that run.
Now, going to the late 90s of the WCW era, you had guys like Goldberg. As DJ mentioned and gave this as a spoiler alert, Dallas Page, one of the greatest in the business as well, Booker T, five-time WCW champion. You had Chris Jericho. And, the WCW era, there's two of the great cruiserweights that's actually made Halloween Havoc one of the very best pay-per-views of WCW I'm about to mention. And Iceman, Broski, and DJ, you know who I'm about to mention out of my mouth. Rey Mysterio Jr. and also Eddie Guerrero.
Oh, yeah. The infamous career versus mask match.
Boy, I miss those old days, especially when Eddie Guerrero ripped open Rey Mysterio Jr.'s mask.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, let's not forget another great that was in WCW, but I don't think that WWE will recognize him because of the
Controversy.
controversy of this. And I'm going to talk about him here. One of my favorites that was in WCW, the Ravid Rovering Chris Benoit.
We cannot forget about that name.
Chris Benoit, he was a great WWE World Champion when WWE had him. But could you imagine if Chris Benoit was a WCW World Champion?
Mm-hmm.
Oh man!
And before we even forget about this one name, and I like to give a tribute to him for his great career in WCW, the late great Steve Mongo McMichael.
Yep. Also, let's talk about three more names. Well, actually, two more names that's on this list on the late 90s. Let's talk about Raven and the best there is, the best there are, and the best there ever will be, Bret the Hitman Hart.
Oh man!
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hell to the yeah.
In other words, one of my best 90s WCW eras was definitely seeing Rey Mysterio Jr. and Eddie Guerrero, no doubt, hands down, but also one of the matches they had with Goldberg and Diamond Dallas Page. That was a dream match I've always wanted to see, and it actually happened. That actually, to me as a WCW fan, that match right there was epic. But going back on this era out of the late 90s WCW era, which wrestler was your guys' favorite, or any other eras that we mentioned, the Hulkamania New World Order era, the early WCW era, or the NWA WCW Foundation era? Going back to the NWA WCW Foundation era, I don't know if you guys know this, but the tag team that was in the NWA at the time was the Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson, one of the best tag teams of NWA and WCW that they had back in that era. So that was something I'm going to throw in there as well. But if you guys want to add on to what we talked about with the late 90s era all the way up.
And I can't forget this name. It was a huge part for a minute in WCW. But we can't forget Norman Smiley. He was a huge part of that era, as well as Dean Malenko.
Yep. Yep. Now we get on, if DJ and Broski Nice Man's through before I jump ship, we're going to get on to the final era, but I'm making sure everybody is done with this era before we move on to the final WCW era so we can go to segment 2.
We're good.
We're good. We're good.
We good.
We're good.
All right, now, this segment, boy, this is going to hit a lot of people here in this chat, and even not in the chat, also in the segment, is WCW champions. We're going to talk about who's won the belt, the main belt, which is the WCW World Championship. And the list of names on this list was Ric Flair, of course, the GOAT, 16-time world champion.
Mm-hmm.
Vader, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Goldberg, Diamond Dallas Page, Bret Hart, Booker T, Kevin Nash, Scott Steiner. Chris Benoit, I don't think won the WCW World Championship, but it recognized him, so he may have. But it says Chris Benoit. I don't know as exact, but it recognizes Chris Benoit as WCW World Champion. You have Jeff Jarrett, David Arquette, Sid Vicious, and Lex Luger. And the discussion here I'm going to add to this, who is the greatest WCW World Champion? And another thing is, don't look at championship reigns. Talk about impact, popularity, match quality, draw, and power, rivalries, and legacy.
If I had to put this in perspective, the two names that stands out like a sore thumb would probably be Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan.
What about you, Brosky or Iceman? Who was the greatest WCW World Champion?
I'll let Iceman say what he has to say before I say mine.
I would have to say Sting. Because he took that title from Hulk Hogan. As I can remember.
Y'all ready for mine?
Yep.
The icons of WCW. Goldberg with his dominant undefeated streak, and Sting of how he had multiple opportunities and major push in storytelling in WCW. You could see how many times and how good the rivalry between Ric Flair and Sting was back when Sting was in WCW. He was known as the franchise.
Now, if Brosky's through answering that, I'm going to tell you mine real quick, but I'm going to wait till Brosky's through.
Go right ahead, Mondo.
So, going back to WCW and seeing the WCW World Championship belt, there's actually three names I'm going to mention. The first name that I have to say would be the greatest WCW World Champion would have to be the one and only Lex Luger. One of the all-time greats that's ever held that belt. Lex Luger was a inspiration for, younger wrestling fans. But, not only Lex Luger. My second pick, the greatest WCW champion of all time, would have to be Sting. And the reason why, Sting, upheld WCW and made it into a household name. He was, the last soldier of WCW. He stayed there until the doors basically closed. WCW had great champions, but my final and third pick is going to shock a lot of people because, a list of these names, you got, Booker T, Kevin Nash, Scott Steiner, Chris Benoit, Jeff Jarrett, David Arquette, Sid Vicious, Lex Luger. But if we're getting down to these names, there's only one person I'm going to add to this list. And, I've already said Bret Hart and Lex Luger, or Lex Luger and Sting. But when it comes down to the last and final pick of the greatest WCW World Champion, I have to go with the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Styling and profiling the Rolex watch. I mean, he revolutionized WCW, and not only Ric Flair has held the WCW, but this is your little history lesson for those who did not know this as a fact, that Ric Flair also held the NWA's World Heavyweight Championship. Something to think about here.
Mm-hmm.
So, getting on to the next segment at hand is one of the greatest segments that we're going to say WCW Greatest Stars. And we're going to talk about these mega stars here. This includes tag team legends, cruiserweight, high-flying stars, and also the mega stars. We're going to start with the mega stars, of course, first. Actually, no. I'll take that back. Let's go to tag team legends and then work our way up to the mega stars. So the tag team legends, you had the Harlem Heat, the Outsiders, you had Steiner's Brothers, you had the Road Warriors, you had the Fabulous Freebirds, you had the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, Harlem Heat,
the Wolfpack,
the Natural Born Thrillers, And Broski was saying something when I was going through the tag team names. I couldn't really.
Yeah, it came across my mind how it was a battle of the NWO and the NWO Wolfpack. You remember back then. But continue.
Out of the tag team legends that I mentioned here in this thing, also the NWO, which would be the Outsiders. What was your favorite tag team in WCW? And I'm going to start with Iceman or Broski, whichever one, and then we pretty much will let DJ answer it once he gets back into the call.
I would have to say Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, the Outsiders.
Well, to be completely honest, nobody can outbeat revolutionized throughout history of WCW. It was the five-time tag team Booker T and Steve. I can't remember what his last name was, but
Stevie Ray. Stevie Ray.
I know exactly who it was. I just couldn't remember what the last name was. But as we see that it further went down the line, Harlem Heat was my number one pick of tag team back in the day of WCW. The second tag team pick was the Wolfpack after that whole feud when WCW had the NWO takeover, and the Wolfpack was a backup of trying to take back over WCW. Also, if you do remember, Mondo, one of the tag teams that was not mentioned was the Four Horsemen. And that Four Horsemen, it was, if I remember correctly in the history books, it was Larry, known as the Enforcer. It was Ric Flair. If my memory is correct, it was Lex Luger. And it was Sting.
Now we get on to the topics of the tag teams. Now we're going to go with the Cruiserweight and High Flying Stars. And there's a lot of High Flying Stars I'm going to mention here on this. You had La Parca. You had Super Calo, Billy Kidman, Ultimo Dragon, Pasicos, Juventud Guerrera, Dean Malenko, Chris Jericho, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio Jr. Out of all these names I've mentioned, who was your favorite WCW Cruiserweight or what we would call High Flying Stars?
All right. I would have to say I'll let DJ or Devin go first.
Well, Thank you, Iceman 3000, for obliging that. But everybody knows the history of the biggest name in the cruiserweight division in WCW, and that's you lie, you cheat, and you steal. None other than
Eddie Guerrero.
Eddie Guerrero.
Well, I think one of the great cruiserweights is Rey Mysterio Jr., master of the 619.
Now, going to the great cruiserweights, also I'm going to give my tag team here. Greatest tag team, I think. Who's the greatest tag team? I would have to say it's a toss-up between Rock and Roller Express and the Road Warriors. But for my cruiserweights, I'm going to have three individuals in this. Rey Mysterio Jr., Eddie Guerrero, and the Iceman himself, not Iceman that we see here in the thing, but I'm talking about the real Iceman, Dean Malenko.
Dean Malenko did put on a good display when he was being seen in bookings.
Yep.
Now we move on to the megastars of the business. And going back to the megastars, this actually is going to be a good thing to ask is who was the greatest megastar WCW? And these names in this megastar include Ric Flair, Sting, Hulk Hogan, Goldberg, Randy Savage, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Diamond Dallas Page, Lex Luger, Vader, Bret Hart, or Booker T. Out of all those names, who do you guys got to pick saying that that's the greatest megastar of WCW?
Well, I choose Sting because he was one of the top guys in WCW.
I totally second Iceman 3000's words, but I also do realize that Vader was a big star as well, because whenever he went out to the ring, I know for a fact there's one superstar that wasn't mentioned, but he was really good in the ring. And I will mention that here in this No Ring, No Rules podcast. But shout out to my old buddy that I haven't spoke to in a while, but everybody knows him as the headliner, Chris Michaels. But as we get back to the topic, Mondo, I do agree with Iceman 3000 cold-heartedly. It would definitely be Sting, because Sting, as we all know, he was the pinnacle, the franchise of WCW. He was the last one standing when everybody else left. So I do agree with Iceman 3000 on that. And my second guess would definitely be Goldberg with his undefeated dominant streak.
Now we get back on another segment. And before that we get on to this segment, I'm going to talk about my favorites as who's the greatest WCW megastar, and it would have to be one of the very best in the time. Razor Ramon, known as Scott Hall, aka Bad Guy, or I think it's Good Guys Finish Last, his old saying. What's that old saying, Iceman? Help me out. Bad guys finish last, but good guys do, or something of that caliber.
Oh yeah, you just said it right there, CJ. You had it right.
So now we get on to the WCW mid-card and underrated stars. This is where the discussion gets really interesting. Talk about wrestlers who gets overshadowed by WCW biggest names. Arn Anderson on the top of that list. Double A. Arn Anderson, very good talent. Barry Windham, Bobby Eaton, Steve Mongo Michael, Cannon, Alex Wright, Fit Finley, William Regal, Megan, Hugh Morris, Norman Smiley, Johnny B. Bad, Disco Inferno, Stevie Ray, Ernest Miller, Peter E. Saturn Raven, Sean O'Hare, Chuck Palumbo, Mike Awesome, Lash Lee Rocks, Glacier. And the question I'm going to ask here for this topic is, which WCW wrestler deserved a much bigger push out of all those names that I mentioned as mid-card and underrated stars?
Iceman, do you want to go first on this one, or you want me to take care of this?
I'll go first on this one.
All right.
I would have to say Disco Inferno. If he had the right push and the right momentum, he would probably have been a bigger star than he was.
I believe with the right adjustment on his bookings, I would believe that Chuck Palumbo and excuse me, Chuck Palumbo and Arn Anderson would have been pushed a lot better if they were actually booked right on the bookings of WCW back then. Because you notice that when Arn Anderson went out there, it was Spinebuster, DDT. Like literally the top pinnacle moves that he's used made his name big. He could have been pushed better in storytelling, as well as Chuck Palumbo.
Now, going back to that question I've already asked Brosky and Iceman, if Brosky and Iceman's, of course, made that their final answer for this question before I move on, before I answer this right here, before we move on to the bigger segment.
You're good, Mondo. Continue.
So now we move over to that question. Which WCW wrestler deserved a much bigger push? Out of all those names, Glacier, one of my favorites in WCW, which, you know, if you guys are Mortal Kombat fans, he was pretty much the Sub-Zero of WCW. I think he would have absolutely been a great world champion or even United States champion if they pushed him in the right direction. Another name Iceman mentioned, Disco Inferno. If he would have been pushed better, he would have been right up there with some of the big names like Steen, Ric Flair, you name it. But also on this list, I have to go with one of my favorites in the out of this mid-card thing is none other than Sean O'Hare. If he would have been pushed right, he would have been a world champion. But there's another name I see that many people don't talk about, Perry Saturn. Don't know if you guys know who Perry Saturn is, but he was a former WCW mid-card and underrated star. But Perry Saturn would definitely been a good world champion if they had a right storyline written out for him, and as well as the others I mentioned, they would all have been great world champions. But WCW at the time, they wasn't thinking about their younger stars because they had bigger stars like Ric Flair, Sting, Scott Steiner, all these big stars. But when it came down to their newer stars, they didn't have much to do with. I mean, they had somewhat storylines, but they didn't have a lot to push them guys up to the to be the future of the company. Moving forward from this, now we go into my favorite, and I'm pretty sure Broski's going to be liking this. We end the WCW segment here as we move over to the land of extreme, ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. One of my favorites that I definitely, loved, watching as a kid. Going back on this, we're going to the ECW major eras. You had Eastern Championship Wrestling. Before it became ECW, guys, that we all know and loved. Don't know if you guys know the history of this, but I'm trying to feed you the history so you guys could have a mindset of, wow, I can't believe that this was done. But, the NWA, going back to WCW, when we first opened the segment with WCW about WCW and NWA working together, NWA had a company and they called it Eastern Championship Wrestling. That was their original promotion. It was connected with NWA, of course. Early championship scene in that company. But here's the downfall of Eastern Championship Wrestling. When Paul Heyman brought it out, this is when Shane Douglas won the NWA World Championship. In other words, Shane Douglas threw the title down and pretty much said, I'm going to make my own Ric Flair. I'm going to make my own Terry Funk, my own, Sting, my own, way. And when he threw that NWA title down, it became the Extreme Revolution. So you saw guys like Paul Heyman, of course, the founder of ECW, Tommy Dreamer, Sandman, Cactus Jack, Raven, and also the franchise of ECW. Now, we know Sting was the franchise of WCW. The franchise of ECW, one of my favorites, and I definitely got an autograph by him, is the franchise Shane Douglas. And if you guys don't believe me, hold on. While Broski and them telling you their favorite part about ECW during those two eras of the Extreme Revolution Eastern Championship Wrestling, let me go find it to show you guys.
You see, in ECW's time era, you gotta look at it this way, because further down the line of ECW is when New Jack came in. And then that was a total devastation of the original gangster, especially when he ended up hitting a power bomb from a scaffolding, sending another star straight through two tables, breaking this superstar's neck from impact. But that was a long time ago. But back to the topic, when ECW showed the land of extreme, as it was changing over to where ECW went from Eastern Championship Wrestling to Extreme Championship Wrestling, Paul Heyman had all these crazy ideas to make it extreme, and then all of a sudden we ended up with a tag team called the Originals. Tommy Dreamer, the King of Violence, and none other than the Tasmanian Devil himself, Taz.
Now, we go to ECW. I told you guys that I had a picture of Shane Douglas. Right here. Autographed and signed ECW championship. You see there. Don't know if you guys can actually see this. Right here. Autographed and signed by Shane Douglas himself. Look at this. The franchise of ECW. ECW World Champion Shane Douglas. With him with the belt. This is real, guys. Real autograph. Now we got, the Shane Douglas out of the way for this autograph. We enter the ECW. We talk about the golden era of ECW. And Iceman was pretty much a WCW fan. I don't know if Iceman was an ECW fan. I'm not saying he wasn't, but I'm going to take you to the golden era. This is where stars you saw like Taz, Rob Van Dam, Sabu, Tommy Dreamer, Jerry Lynn, Lance Storm, Chris Candido, and also one of my favorite that's been WWE Tag Team Champions, TNA Tag Team Champions, and I'm pretty sure Tag Team Champions all the way around the professional wrestling scene. One of the greatest tag teams to ever do it, to lace up a pair of boots. Bubba Ray, Devon, the Dudley Boys.
I totally agree with that, Mondo. You also do recall that back in the day, also Spike Dudley came into the mix of ECW, and you do notice that further down the line, Kelly was there as well. But continue.
Now we get on to the ECW late era. You got Mike Awesome. You got the Man Beast, Rhino. You got Justin Incredible. You got Masito Tanaka. You got Steve Carino, one of my favorites. Tajiri, Super Crazy. And also one of my favorites that he is also the original gangster. He will always be a legend in ECW. And I don't know if you guys ever watched it, but he also fought Vince Grimes in a scaffold match. And I'm talking about this man that I'm going to name here, the one and only original gangster of ECW, New Jack.
Oh boy.
Now with New Jack, there was a final ECW era, ECW finals years. There was also a WWE version of ECW, which that wasn't ECW. That was a washed down mistake that Vince done. He should have never bought ECW out if he was going to make it look like a kid PG show. ECW was not PG. He should have never bought ECW. I'm not going to get into that. I may get into that to a later down on the road podcast, maybe for episode 10, 11, or future episodes. Now we get into the champions of ECW. And before we move on to the champions, if Iceman and Broski's got anything to say about this, segment for the eras of ECW, they have the right to have their input in it. If not, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Well, I do remember back in the day of ECW. I'm over here getting tongue-tied here. Back in that day, I remember that the Originals was a top-tier tag team in ECW. And they were literally really dominant in tag team matches. We also look back, and this name wasn't mentioned, but you got to also look at this superstar as well. And he was known as the Beast of the East. None other than Bam Bam Bigelow. So go ahead, Mondo. Continue.
Now we get on to the ECW champions, and this is one of my favorites. Championship, segments of ECW because, the first one that very hold dear in my heart that I loved, especially him as ECW champion, the franchise Shane Douglas. The franchise, took the not the WCW, but the ECW World Championship to new heights. He revolutionized ECW. There was a reason why that he was the franchise of ECW, and seeing how Shane Douglas took something and made it into I wouldn't say global empire, but made it into a company to where it was like successful. It was not like WWE where it was a big massive company, but it had its ups as a roller coaster. The legendary status of Shane Douglas, the first ever champion with the ECW championship, will go down in the history books. Shane Douglas was a great world champion. Wished he would have been WCW world champion, but WCW was not that creative to make him a champion, so I could see why Shane Douglas was a former ECW world champion. And also, don't know if you guys know this, but Paul Heyman had the creative mindset to put Shane Douglas as ECW world heavyweight champion. So Paul Heyman was behind the success of why Shane Douglas was the ECW champion. Something that you guys need to take in, that Paul Heyman was the creative genius, bringing Shane Douglas his greatest championship not only defense, but also greatest championship accomplishments through the ECW World Championship. Then you also had Terry Funk, late great Terry Funk, rest in peace. You had Raven, another good wrestler that was ECW World Champion. You had Sandman, you had Taz, you had Mike Awesome, you had Marcino Tanaka, you had the innovator of violence, Tommy Dreamer, one of my favorites. You had Just Incredible, you had Rhino, you had Steve Corino. And the question is, out of all these champions, who is the greatest ECW champion of all time? And Iceman and Broski, I'm going to let you guys go first, and I'll give you my greatest ECW champion of all time after you guys answer that big question out of this segment.
Well, Iceman, I'll go first this time. I believe the best ECW world champion of all time is none other than the franchise himself, Shane Douglas. Because if it wasn't for him paving the landscape for ECW stars, it wouldn't look as good as it is today. Because after all, he was the one that won the NWA title and pretty much threw it in the trash, so to say, to revitalize ECW as ECW top champion.
Speaking about the NWA title, since Broski brought that up, I'm going to bring this baby out to show you guys exactly how memorial this is. This is the title that Shane Douglas has won, as you guys can see here. The NWA's World Heavyweight Championship I got in my grasp. Look at this beauty. Same title that Shane Douglas has won. Ric Flair. You have Harley Race. You have Sting, Sabu, Terry Funk. All of these guys have held this championship. This is a legendary championship right here. And going back to what Broski said about this championship is this championship's held some big names. Before, like Broski said, Shane Douglas threw it in the trash can and made his own championship, called it the ECW World Championship, and that's how ECW got its intake on being a successful company. But you can continue, Broski, if you got anything else you want to add to that.
Well, I do recall that after the NWA championship got thrown in the trash is when NWA was wondering, okay, what the hell's going on here? And they didn't know that Shane Douglas was literally franchising the ECW title in front of their faces, saying, "No, I don't need that shit. I'm going to be better than that. I'm going to be ECW champion and come to ECW and see what we're really all about." You could literally look back at Shane Douglas's promo. He had a lit fire underneath of his boots of wanting people to come watch ECW, see what he's really about. And that's how ECW, known as Extreme Championship Wrestling, was born. Iceman, you can continue where I left off.
Well, one of my favorite ECW champions was Rob Van Dam. The master of the 5-star frog splash.
Now, if Iceman pretty much gave his ECW intake, I'm going to go ahead and do mine as soon as Iceman is through with his. I don't want to interrupt or anything.
You can go ahead, CJ.
So going back to the ECW champion, who was the greatest ECW champion of all time? Browski already took my answer. The franchise of ECW, and there, like I said, there's a reason why he's called the franchise. Like Sting was the franchise of WCW, Shane Douglas got the franchise right on ECW. Shane Douglas revolutionized ECW to a big, phenomenal company. And my question has already been answered through Broski, but I have to agree with him on there. Shane Douglas was the greatest ECW champion of all time. Hands down. Now we get into some big time discussions with ECW. We go to tag team stars of ECW, and this is going to be a good hit in case you guys want to stick around to actually get a load of these tag teams. You had, back in ECW, you had the Dudley Boys, you had the Eliminators, you had the Gangsters, you had the Impact Players, you had the Pitbulls, and you also had FBI. Out of all those tag teams we mentioned, who is the greatest ECW tag team to ever step in the company Extreme Championship Wrestling? Broski, Iceman, you can go first. One of y'all can go first.
I'll let Iceman take over.
I have to say an ECW All-Star. I'll have to say Sabu. Because he did stuff that nobody else could do with chairs.
I mean tag team, Iceman.
Oh, tag team?
Yeah, tag team.
Who's all the tag teams for ECW?
So the Dudley Boys, Eliminators, the Gangsters, the Impact Players, FBI.
I'll have to say the Dudley Boys. Because they was the greatest tag team in ECW.
I totally agree with Iceman on that, because no one could have done a better ECW promo than other than the Dudley Boys, especially during that one segment where Bubba Ray Dudley is basically telling them that you should sit down there in the front row because this guy's over here sucking dick.
No, actually, I could tell you the full story behind that. It wasn't a guy. In other words, he's saying we got a mom in the front row who taught her daughter how to suck dick. That was the greatest quote out of I think Bubba Ray Dudley's mouth that he ever put that promo on. And at the time, that segment, I think it was like at Heat Wave. Don't know. I think it's 94, 93, 95, somewhere around that year that Bubba Ray Dudley literally had heat from that promo because some fan was mad because, at the time, this wrestling that ECW done was not soft, like today's era. If somebody from today's era had said something like Bubba Ray Dudley did back then, hands down, you might as well just say there'd be lawsuits up the ass. I mean, there would be lawsuits. You would see somebody getting sued. Somebody would literally be butthurt. I mean, it's ridiculous, But going back to that one promo Broski said, Bubba Ray Dudley was one of the successors in psychological masterminds. And what I mean by that is he literally, when he done a promo, he was like on top. He would literally make you mad as a fan. He would literally have you literally like mad. Like he wanted your reaction, and and he knew how to get it to press your buttons. Same thing with Devon. Devon knew. You had Spike Dudley. One of the matches, matter of fact, where Spike Dudley gets, I think, powerbombed through a table and he hits his head on the table, but it chips the table. I don't know if you guys saw this, but this was actually at Heat Wave where Bubba Ray Dudley picks up Spike Dudley, tries to powerbomb him, but his head hits the corner piece of that table and literally, like, it hits his head, but the tip of that table comes off, but the table's still standing. And to me, like, that was a dangerous, what we call in the business, spot, because let's say if it's a scenario, what if the table didn't break in that corner piece, that man would have got a concussion because of the head, because Bubba Ray Dudley did not have his head in a right spot that he needs to protect Spike Dudley. And going back to that tag team, that tag team match was 100% lethal. I mean, you take the Dudley boys, you take guys that's been in the business, probably more years and experiences, myself and Broski has done, and they probably have more matches and more intake than me and him put together, but also they know how to play that psychological game to get a reaction. That's why the Dudley boys was successful. But I'm trying to not go on to a major history lesson with CJ here for this segment, but you can continue where you left off, Broski, from that.
Well, I do remember that time era where all of those dangerous matches with the Dudley boys, because honestly, they didn't hold back at all when they went out there to fight. And what even hurt worse was sometimes when they did their promos, it was straight on point. They didn't care. They would either get your reaction one of two ways. You either acknowledge the reaction or you got butt hurt over it. And then they would laugh about it. That's what part of the Dudley Boys' greatest heel segment has ever been known in ECW's time. As into effect, go ahead, Mondo, and continue on where you left off.
going back to the greatest tag teams in my eras of watching ECW, have to be two teams. Definitely the Dudley Boys in that greatest tag team of all. But also, let's go back and go back a step here. Also, one of my greatest tag teams that I remember, in ECW. Also, one of my favorites was Balls Mahoney and Spike Dudley. I think that was Dudley Boys' opponents at Heatwave for their tag team titles. Then also, not only tag teams, but I'm gonna add managers to this. Joe Gertner. If anybody knows Joe Gertner from ECW, you would know where I'm talking about as far as manager. That dude was a creative genius when it came to promos. That dude was like a Dudley in his own right, not only through the professional wrestler scene, but also through the manager side of professional wrestling. He took the professional wrestling scene to new heights through ECW. This dude was like the man between her legs from Who's She Beg. You called it a sarcasm when I gave her an orgasm. I'm like, what? I'm like, did I just hear that correctly? Next thing I know, the man between her legs, and I'm just sitting there like, what? Did he just say that on TV? Yeah, that was Joe Gertner, ladies and gentlemen. One of the greatest managers in the entire ECW locker room. One of my favorites, matter of fact. Now we're going to get on to the cruiserweights. Or should we say the technical stars? We already did the tag teams. Now we go on to the cruiserweight technical stars. You had Jerry Lynn, Lance Storm, Chris Cadeno, Tajiri, Super Crazy, Little Guido, Mikey Whipwreck, and Dean Malenko. Who is the greatest cruiserweight in ECW out of those names? And Iceman Broski, if you want to take over from this, I'll answer that as soon as you guys answer this.
I'll go first. I believe not a lot of people know this, but I would say Mikey.
Mikey Whipwreck?
Yes, because not a lot of stars could own up to what he did in the ring. Especially that stunner that he used inside the ring, known as the whippersnapper, is what a lot of people would recognize it as. Until a certain superstar of today's era, which was back in my era, that ended up turning it into the all-time great stunner of all time, which was Stone Cold Steve Austin, Stone Cold Stunner. Mikey Rick Rhett, he revolutionized that stunner, and it was one very top arsenal move that I've seen of all time. But you also got to look back. There was a superstar called the Superstar, Steve Austin, there as well. Now, I'll hand the floor over to Iceman.
Well, my favorite cruiserweight was Super Crazy because he would always do like crazy stunts in the ring with chairs and tables and.
Speaking about Super Crazy, Iceman, you remember that day that one segment he did in ECW that I think he was on top of like where the theater is, like they had like a rail that was up there. It was like like I'd say about 2 stories. He literally got on top of that and moonsaulted right off top of that onto somebody. I don't know who it was, but I remember him doing a moonsault off of 2 stories off the top of a rail.
Was it on the Psychosis?
I don't know if it was Psychosis, but I remember that he moonsaulted off the top of this story. It was 2 stories. And moonsaulted right off the top of that onto somebody. And I'm sitting there, watching, and I'm like, dude, this dude is fucking crazy. Because a normal human being would not moonsault off the top of a 2-story arena. And, back then ECW had like a theater. It was more like a theater type. So you could imagine going off the top of those rails and doing a moonsault and absolutely landing that moonsault right on, 2 to 3 people. I don't know, but I'm just saying that moonsault is what makes Super Crazy that name. Super Crazy. He done some crazy stuff.
Yep.
Now, if I'm going to give my intake, I'd have to go with 3 people on this cruiserweight name. Jerry Lynn, one of the greatest to ever do the cruiserweights for ECW. Jerry Lynn was one of my favorites, but also Super Crazy and Mikey Whipwreck as the second. But the third one would be, many people did not like this dude. Many people thought he was underrated. But I love this dude, especially ECW. Also, when he done in WWE, Lance Storm. Lance Storm was, one of the greatest Canadian wrestlers. I think he was from Canada. Maybe he's from the U.S. I think he's Canadian. But he was one of the greatest technical cruiserweights that we had back in those eras of ECW. Now we get on to the big names. And I'm going to let you and Broski do this, but we get on to the big names. You had Paul Heyman. You had Tommy Dreamer. You had Sandman. You had Raven. You had Taz, Sabu, Rob Van Dam, Shane Douglas, Terry Funk, Mike Awesome, Masito Tanaka, Justin Credible, Rhino, and Steve Corino. Out of those names, who was the greatest big name out of ECW?
I'll let Iceman go first.
Well, I have to say, well, here's my big 3. I say Taz, Rob Van Dam, and Sabu.
My top star back in the day, out of all of them, I remember watching the old ECW shows and whatnot when ECW was live. I remember seeing clips of how great Sabu was when he was out there battling it out on every freaking booking that he had. But you also got to look back at who was Sabu's manager. None other than Jeannie herself. I've actually met both of them. Both of them are great people. I I was actually there and actually sat down and talked to them both and shook their hands out of respect. But that was, I believe, about 3 or 4 years ago. But as we get back to the topic, yes, I believe the greatest ECW star out of all of that pick would be definitely Sabu. But of course, you also got to look back at Harry Funk and the Sandman. Because, you know, if it wasn't for them, they were the foundation of superstars that opened up the landscape for ECW. Because you got your big stars that opened up the doors for all that. And Sabu was one of them. Go ahead, CJ. Go right ahead and continue on.
So going back to the the greatest stars, the big names. Who is the greatest ECW star that I personally think there's 3 names that come to play. I'm gonna start with the third one and go up to my top one. Starting with number 3, I have to go with one of the greatest luchadors in the game. That he was a former Intercontinental Champion for WWE, former Hardcore Champion. Won the tag team titles with Kane, Mr. Monday Night, Rob Van Dam. Now, my second pick is, of course, a very good pick. He revolutionized ECW as well as Shane Douglas. And he was the last ECW champion before it completely shut down. And I have to go with the Man Beast, Rhino. Now the first one that I will say the greatest ECW star of all time is definitely the franchise Shane Douglas. Shane Douglas made ECW what it was today. Shane Douglas was I would say he was the quarterback of ECW. He was the revolutionist of ECW. He was the mastermind of the professional wrestling scene, not the creative scene, but a professional wrestler and what it looks like. He was the mastermind in the creative genius and the looks. He had the physique, he had the ring IQ, the charisma. I mean, you name it all. Shane Douglas was pretty much the be-all, end-alls of ECW. And going back on this, definitely I got to say Shane Douglas as the greatest ECW big name of all time. Now we're going to get on to the next topic here for this, is we're going to talk about the ECW mid-carders and underrated stars. I think this is, a very good discussion. Like WCW, they had their mid-carders. They had Disco Inferno, Glacier, guys like that. But, ECW, we got a lot of names here that I feel like that was their mid-carders and underrated stars for a reason. First one, Nike Whipwreck. Broski, had a good intake on him. Little Ghetto. You had Ballsman Honley. You had Axel Rotten. You had Danny Doring. You had Roadkill. You had Nova. Stevie Richards. He does YouTube, that matter of fact. I saw one of his podcasts is talking about, I think it was one of the WWE shows that they had that that was our last ECW show before they went to NXT. Stevie Richards said that pretty much WWE didn't know what to do with ECW when they bought it, and I have to agree with him. Kid Cash, Don't know if you guys know this, but Kid Cash was also trained by NWA legend and WWE Hall of Famer Ricky Morton, one half of the Rock and Roll Express. Something to actually get information and keep that knowledge in the back of your head. Kid Cash was a student of Ricky Morton. You had C.W. Anderson, you had Simon Diamond, you had Tony Maluk, you had the Blue Meanie. Very good talent with the Blue Meanie. I think that he had a NWO version. I think it was Blue World Order, BWO. What was it? Blue World Order? I'm pretty sure it was. I don't want to like.
Yep, it was.
I'm pretty sure it was.
Definitely. It was definitely BWO.
I'm 100% right on that. I was wanting to make sure it was Blue World Order. With the Blue Meanie that he came up. He was a faction with. You also had Super Crazy. Iceman mentioned him earlier. One of the greatest cruiserweights in the game, Tajiri, but also Little Spike Dudley. Who's a Spike Dudley fan in the house? What if Spike Dudley won the WWF championship? What if Spike Dudley was ECW champion? What if Spike Dudley was WCW world champion? What if Spike Dudley was a Royal Rumble winner? What if Spike Dudley was a Money in the Bank winner? A lot of what if scenarios here with Spike Dudley.
What if Spike Dudley pulled a James Ellsworth and won a championship? I mean, anything's possible.
Anything is possible, but the question is, I want to ask you and Iceman or anybody else, also anybody else in the live chat here on YouTube, is who doesn't get enough credits for helping build WCW? So out of those underrated guys, which one of these does not get enough credit for help build the ECW, what it was?
I'll go first on this one, but last I recall, I believe it was Kid Cash that didn't get as much credit. Because I know Kid Cash had to do a lot of good things for WCW, and he was overlooked. As for Iceman 3000, he has the floor.
I would have to say the Blue Meanie. Because he was overlooked a lot.
Out of all that, the person doesn't get enough credit for building WCW. Out of all of that, I would have to say the former ECW world champion, Mikey Whipwreck. He didn't get enough time, as champion. I think his championship reign was, maybe he was television champion. One of those two belts he won. I definitely know that he was like one day of being champion. He didn't have enough days of holding on to the title. It was pretty much a 1 day time, and they pretty much just put it on somebody else. I personally think that a lot of these guys, Kid Cash, Stevie Richards, Mikey Whipwreck, Balls Mahoney, Super Crazy, Little Spike Dudley. Spike Dudley would have been a great ECW champion, but I'm not going to say it was Paul Heyman's fault. I'm going to say that I'm pretty sure one of the writers that at the time that was helping Paul Heyman didn't like Spike Dudley or didn't see nothing in him to make him an ECW champion. I don't know why it didn't happen. I'm just naming things out there. There's a lot of things that maybe somebody didn't like Spike Dudley and didn't want him to become champion. A lot of things can happen in the business, guys. A lot of things could pull you back of stuff you want to do. There's a lot of things that change. That's the reason why they say carbs subject to change. We're going to get on to the WCW and ECW matches that made history. Now we're going to get on to a match of WCW. We're going to start with WCW, of course. Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat, one of my matches. This is where I'll talk to you guys about, when we open the WCW side of things before we moved over to ECW. This is where I told you guys that Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat, they literally chopped the hell out of each other. It was pretty much a chop fest at a supermarket. They had more chops than pork chops combined at a supermarket. These guys would literally chop each other's chest. You see Ricky Steamboat, he would chop Ric Flair. Ric Flair would chop him back. It sounded like, they was killing each other with the chops. They would have, their chest would be, blue and black because the chops they would be taking. Ric Flair and, Ricky Steamboat, they chopped the heck out of each other during that match. And that's what made, history in WCW. Them two killed each other. Also, another thing that we're going to talk about too, Sting versus Vader, Sting versus Hogan, Goldberg versus Hulk Hogan, Goldberg versus Diamond Dallas Page, Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio Jr., the title versus the mask sort of thing that Broski was talking about. One of the greatest storylines in WCW history. Also, you had Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Dean Malenko, Chris Jericho versus Dean Malenko, War Games match in the first ever, the first major NWO storyline battles. This is where the NWO and the NWO Wolfpack came head to head. This is where the creative spark lit in WCW with all those matches right there that I named lit. But Iceman and Broski, out of all those matches I did mention, what was the match that made WCW far as history out of all those matches?
I believe, if Iceman don't want to go first, I truly believe it was the whole, it was between two different type of matches. It was Sting and Ric Flair, and it was also between Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio Jr. Don't get me wrong, because I know that chop fest between Ric Flair and Steamboat was something that no one ever expected, but you also got to look at another thing. You also got to look at the Rock and Roll Express. Ricky Morton, he went out there, did chops. There was a time when he was actually in a singles match. I can't remember who it was, but he would automatically get his opponent over there towards the turnbuckle and just chop the hell out of their chest just repeatedly. It's like one of the SMG rifles, the automatics that just goes pop, 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 just to get a reaction out of the crowd. Like, legitimately, from my experience, there was a numerous amount of good matches in WCW at the time. But my top two would definitely be Flair and Sting with the whole Scorpion Deathlock versus the Figure 4. And then you had the whole issue with Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio Jr. about the mask versus career. But then you look back And I also do recall the whole career where Goldberg went all hot and mighty in his undefeated streak, and he had a rivalry in booking against Bret Hart, and how he ended up spearing the hell out of Bret the Hitman Hart, and Bret the Hitman Hart used a daggum steel plate to protect himself and took down Goldberg for that specific match. But I'm gonna step back for a moment and let Iceman continue where he's gonna lead.
Well, one of my favorite matches was when Sting challenged Hollywood Hulk Hogan for the world title. When Sting just came back after finding himself again, who he really was, and people and the fans thought he would never challenge Hollywood Hulk Hogan for the world title, but he came back and did, and he won that title and shocked the fans
Are you
when he came
talking
back as a
about
pro Sting.
Iceman?
Yep,
Excuse me for a minute. Are you talking about the time when uh Sting came back known as the Crow version of himself?
yep.
Back
When
where
he was coming
Razor
back trying to find
Ramon,
who he was.
yeah, back where Razor Ramon gave him the idea from the Crow to give him that gimmick of being all mysterious.
Yep, when he was just sitting up there in the rafters, not saying a word.
That's exactly what I remember. That's exactly what I remember. Sting, he was very mysterious at that point in his career. He wasn't the one that went out there and went, woo! And everything else, getting all everybody hyped up. But during that time when he was starting off with the whole complete white crow face, I remember that segment because no one knew exactly what he was going to do for WCW because NWO was taking over at that point.
And
But go
you
ahead and continue.
and the NWO tried numerous times to get him to join, but when the final time when they tried to get him to join, he said, "Look, I'm on my own. I work alone."
He didn't. He didn't tell him no, and he didn't tell him yes.
So going back on that topic with Sting telling the NWO no, the question that really gets to me is what if Sting actually accepted it, and what would the outcome be if he accepted to join the NWO? That's a question that I definitely want to ask here. Not only for you and Broski, but also the chat.
That's a question I'd like to know because how would his career change if he did? Because I know for a fact when he did join, it wasn't the actual NWO. He joined the Wolfpack version of NWO.
Yep.
So the question lies where Mondo was actually saying this. What if he actually joined the original NWO? That would be a whole different statement because then I think WCW would probably look down on Sting since Sting was a huge part of WCW. And at that given time, if he would have actually joined WCW, he probably would have ended up put into a segment where Hollywood Hulk Hogan would automatically force himself to be NWO World Heavyweight Champion of WCW. Just like when he legitimately, if I do recall in the history books of WCW, he used the one finger death punch on Kevin Nash to get the championship off of Kevin Nash. Do you remember that due date, time span, Mondo?
Yep, definitely remember it. Now, going to a different segment, or not a different segment, but a segment that's on this too. What if, scenario for the ECW matches that made history? You had Terry Funk versus Sabu, Tommy Dreamer versus Raven, Raven versus Sandman, Taz versus Sabu, Rob Van Dam versus Jerry Lynn, Mike Awesome versus Masito Tanaka, and then Shane Douglas versus Terry Funk, Dudley Boys versus Eliminators, ECW three-way dance matches, or ECW tag team wars. Out of all those matches there, what match made ECW history-wise out of all those matches mentioned?
I believe it would have been the tag team wars because honestly, if there was not a war happening, it wasn't really interesting unless you had the original people fighting. Now, don't get me wrong. Shane Douglas, whenever he goes out there and booking, he does put on one hell of a match out there every single time he goes out. And so does Raven. So does Sandman. So does Terry Funk. Rob Van Dam does the exact same thing. So it pretty much varies in volumes of who they're out there facing and all the chemistry behind of what they're doing. Because certain stars, they're not only strikers, but you also got to look at, okay, how well can they chain wrestle to keep the attention of the audience while they do all of their extreme stunts that they usually do.
Yep.
But the way I see it, that's where the dilemma goes because every wrestler is different on their fighting styles. Iceman knows where I'm going with this because you got to look at it this way.
Here's something too, Broski, that Chris Conscience actually said too. Terry and Dory had a match against each other. That's let me research this to see if it's on ECW to confirm or WCW. Researching it right now. So yeah, they actually had a match against each other. It was actually a tag team match, it looks like. It was July 16th, 1994. ECW Hitway featured a barbed wire match between Terry Funk and Dory Funk Jr. against the Public Enemy, Rock Rocco, and Johnny Grudge.
Oh, boy. That was a brutal fight.
Let's see if I can type in singles. See if they actually had a singles match. Don't say, but they had a tag team match. And I'm going to go back to it was July 6th, 16th, 1994. So this was 5 days before I was born. After I was born, matter of fact. So something to take notes in, but you was saying, Broski, go ahead.
But with every wrestler in the ECW days, they had their own way of doing things. But as we was getting back to the topic, yes, Terry Funk did fight, and Dory did fight as well. But as you were saying, they did face up against the Public Enemy.
Yep.
And that was a brutal fight. I'm telling you that now. Blood was everywhere.
Now, Iceman, getting on the topic of Broski, answered that question of the ECW. Out of all those matches that made history in ECW, with Terry Funk versus Sabu, Tommy Dreamer versus Raven, Raven versus Sandman, Taz versus Sabu, Rob Van Dam versus Jerry Lynn, Shane Douglas versus Terry Funk, Dudley Boys versus Eliminators, and Mike Awesome versus Masuto Tanaka. Which one will go down in history as the match that made ECW history famous out of all those?
I have to say the Terry Funk match.
Which one? There was two. He had a match with Shane Douglas and a match with Sabu.
I'd say the one with Sabu. That one was brutal. That one tore the house down.
Now, if Iceman, you answered that, and Broski, you answered that, I'm going to answer that before we get on to our final segment before closing.
You're good, CJ. Do what you need to.
So, the match that pretty much made history in ECW, I'm going to name three of those matches. Shane Douglas versus Terry Funk won an all-time greatest match, in Shane Douglas' career as well as Terry Funk. But if we're going to go with a tag team, I would have to say Public Enemy versus the Funks. That Broski's right. That was a damn brutal match. That was pretty much, they had gore all the way around that arena. It was just something to just literally. What I'm trying to say is, that was like the ECW style in their playbook. And then last but not least, if we're going to the matches that made ECW history, this match is definitely going to be hitting more towards Kevin Impact's way because I know he was a huge fan of this man. Sandman versus the GOAT of ECW, Raven. And Chris Conscience here had like a history lesson here for this. I know it don't pertain to ECW and WCW, but still we're going to share it out here. He says, Terry Funk and Dory Funk Jr. spent mostly entire their legendary careers teaming together as brothers, but they did face each other in a famous one-on-one singles match on April 30th, 1981 in AJPW. So there's your history lessons from Conscience himself that I didn't even know about. I thought they faced each other in ECW, so that's why I definitely went back and researched it, but it was through AJPW. So history lessons in case you didn't know that the Funk Brothers faced each other.
You learn something new every day.
So now, going back from that, we're going to hit the closing minutes of this podcast, the final segment, the legacy. And with this final segment in the legacy for both WCW and ECW, and the question I want to ask to also the live chat, as well as me and Broski and Iceman, is this: if WCW and ECW had never existed, what would professional wrestling look? Would it look the same today?
No, it would not.
Nope.
So the question for you guys in the live chat, as well as us, you guys can answer that. We will share everyone's comment during the show. And Do actually commented back. He says nope. So DDW Do, huge shout out to him for answering that as we get to this. But I'm still going to leave the question up so you guys can answer it as we go. Both promotions wouldn't make, if it never existed, here's what the influence of wrestling, would affect. There wouldn't be no television for both brands to have them in a. I will grab him later, Do. Thank you for reminding me. But through the influence of professional wrestling, if WCW and ECW never existed, professional wrestling wouldn't look the same today, and here's the reason why: through their television, it would. There wouldn't be matches that we could literally go back and watch that redefined what wrestling was. Whether you was a WCW fan or an ECW fan, there wouldn't be no legacy. Somebody that left something behind for these newer generation to feed off of, to maybe learn new craft of the business. Going back to with the characters, their gimmicks, they got to know their craft. If you don't know your craft, you're not going to really pick up on what you need to learn for as the psychological and also the creative mindset behind your character. It goes back to characters here. This is the reason why it's very important. Match styles. You got different match styles. You got New Japan. You got Northern wrestling. And also you got Southern wrestling. Northern is pretty much... they don't really focus on Southern wrestling, but Southern is pretty much brutality. As well as me and Broski, because we pretty much know the Southern part about wrestling. It was pretty much brutality, and we Southern boys didn't hold back. We threw chops, we hit you, you would feel it. The Northern boys, they weren't much so brutal as us. Going back to cruiserweight wrestling, hardcore wrestling, tag team wrestling. If both of those companies didn't exist, we wouldn't see the Dudley Boys. We wouldn't see Shane Douglas. We wouldn't see a Tommy Dreamer, a Sandman, Sting, Goldberg, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Ric Flair, Bret Hart, Disco Inferno, Glacier, all those guys that was in WCW, ECW, we wouldn't see today if these two companies didn't exist. We wouldn't see the promos, the storytelling, and also the wrestling culture of both brands. Closing line, WCW showed us that the world could be another major wrestling powerhouse. ECW showed the world that you didn't need to be the bigger company to change the industry. Different philosophies, different audience, different identities. But both left an undeniable mark. WCW had the power, ECW had the attitude, and professional wrestling was never the same again. This has been No Rings, No Rules, Episode 9, WCW and ECW, Two Worlds, One Revolution. And before we close, guys, I'm going to go back to these comments that I left. As Chris Constance already answered that question, no, because it would have caused chaos or viciousness. And then, do agree with him there. Without WCW, their Mexico wrestling wouldn't be big as it is today. Also, said in the Attitude Era and NWO doesn't happen without ECW. So something, to learn about both brands here as we're going through and trying to close everything up. Also, Chris Conscience, made a good thing about this. Could you imagine ECW versus CCW? That would be something that we talk about maybe episode 10. Maybe we bring Chris Conscience on and he could tell his intake, something I may do for episode 10 for No Rings, No Rules podcast. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Devin Broski and also Iceman for the time that we have. And want to thank everyone for listening and tuning in for No Rings, No Rules podcast. And we will see you guys on the next episode. Definitely stay tuned, subscribe, and turn that bell for notifications. And we will see you guys on the next episode. Don't forget, the 12th of September, we do have an Attitude Era versus the Golden Era podcast. Going to be probably episode 10 of No Rings, No Rules. Definitely stick with that one because that one's going to be a major topic in the discussion. But until then, guys, thank you guys for everything that you do. Thank you guys for the ones that showed up, showed support, and even the ones that, made it late. We will see you guys on the next one. Also, huge shout out to the partnerships, JTV Wrestling, ONW, APW, which is Alligator Pro Wrestling, ONW, which is known as Outlaw Nation Wrestling. Huge shout out to them. Huge shout out to DDW. And can't wait to see what, the future holds. But until then, guys, we may come back to this segment of the complete story, WCW and ECW, with Chris Conscience versions of the two. You never know what I might bring to the table of No Rings, No Rules podcast, but we want to thank everyone that has been listening, tuning in, and also that has been interacting with the chat. And we will see you guys on the next one. Y'all have a good and blessed night. Thank you guys for watching. We will see you guys on the next episode. Peace.